Welcome, folks, to our presentation here, co-hosted between WiLS and Scribble on how to solve the AI plagiarism problem. This session is designed, I'm looking over here because that's where my slides are, but I should be looking here because that's where the camera is. This session is being presented specifically for our higher ed institutions, which is very exciting for me. Victor has been working with WiLS, Scribble, through Victor, has been working with WiLS for a couple of years now, primarily working with our K-12 libraries, but he thinks, and so do we, that Scribble has a lot to offer to higher ed as well, particularly on a topical issue like this. So with all of that preliminary out of the way, I'd like to turn things over to Victor Karkar, who is co-founder and CEO of Scribble. Victor, are you ready to take over?
Yes, so let me go ahead and share the slides and my screen, and we can dive right in. All right, can you see my screen now? Yeah?
Looks good.
All right, thank you. And Jeff, later I'll be showing you a brief video as I often do. And when I do that, if you don't mind, give me a thumbs up if you can hear it okay, because sometimes the audio gets caught and people aren't necessarily able to hear what I'm talking about.
I'll definitely do that.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks, everybody. So wonderful to meet you all. We're really excited to, basically do this kind of a presentation with you all, which we've done a similar version with WiLS's, K-12 school librarians. And so we're really happy to be kind of expanding the conversation to include you all. I myself have actually been having this conversation a lot, as you can imagine, over the last year with really faculty in higher ed, librarians across K-12 and higher ed, and teachers in K-12 as well. So it's been a pretty broad conversation around the impact of AI on the writing process. And so really happy that you're here so we can kind of at least share what we've learned and see if there's a way to maybe kind of help you if you're seeing this issue come up in your on your campuses. So you can see my screen now, and I'll just kind of dive in and tell you a little bit about us, and then tell you a little bit about what we've learned, with regards to AI and AI plagiarism. So again, my name is Victor. I'm one of the co-founders of Scribble. I started this company because I needed something like this originally in school. So it's a story of, as they say, an entrepreneur kind of scratching their own itch. But it turns out this is a need that we've sort of addressed really pretty broadly for lots of students, across K-12 and higher ed. And over the years, we've worked with lots of educators, again, across K-12 and higher ed. We call Scribble a super app for research and writing because it does a lot under one roof, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And then at the top there, you see logos for the National Science Foundation and the Department of Ed, because we have been very fortunate to be supported by competitive grants by both organizations. And so I can talk more about that later, or if you're interested in knowing what the work is that we're doing currently with the Department of Ed grant, which is really interesting, I'd be happy to talk about that as well, maybe during Q&A. So let me dive in. These days, we tend to talk about ourselves in two parts. One is kind of giving you an overview of what it is we do so you understand where we're coming from and what our point of view is on the AI stuff. And then part two is actually getting specifically to talking about that AI plagiarism problem and understanding, probably because you have already heard what we do, why we think we can help with that problem. I'm also going to be covering a little bit of how not to solve the AI plagiarism problem, because there's things that people have said to me over the last year that I think they don't quite fit or they don't quite sit right. And I'm sure you've heard some of these things, I think, in your own campuses. So let's start a little bit with an overview for those of you that are not familiar with us. As Jeff said, historically, we've done a lot of work in secondary K-12. And some of that obviously very much impacts you all because you're seeing, the seniors from high school come into the colleges where you are. But really, where we started was addressing a huge kind of longstanding research and writing skills crisis. The data shows that over half of our kids in secondary in this country struggle with research skills, and they're not ready for college level writing, right? I'd imagine that many of you sort of experience this in the work that you do with students directly or in the courses that you're collaborating with faculty on. And that figure at the bottom there from the Chronicle of Higher Ed, I think, is really telling. 61% of high school teachers said that their students have never written a paper that's more than 5 pages. And unfortunately, that's the reality that you're faced with, because students then coming from high school into your realm really haven't had the experience to help them really succeed well in college with doing this kind of work, which is, of course, required across lots of different courses and disciplines when they're there in college with you. We know that the lack of K-12 preparedness ends up having an impact when they're with you, because there's data and studies that talk about that as well. Really talking about how for research and writing, students, faculty, and instructors in higher ed are saying that students coming to them are not well prepared in these areas, right? So you see it on the flip side in your realm as well. Now, in the work that we've done, we've sort of dissected the workflow to try to understand why it's such a heavy lift for both, educators in K-12 as well as I think educators in higher ed. And what you see is that the research and writing process is a logistically complex one, right? There's lots of steps involved, like the ones you see here on the left-hand side of the slide. And historically, students and educators have had to cobble together a lot of different tools to get through that workflow. So they might have a standalone citation tool or reference manager for their bibliography. They might have a database, so they might have a PDF annotation tool that helps them do database research. They might have a web clipper to help them gather internet research. They're then writing in Google Docs or Microsoft Word. And so it's a pretty disjointed, fragmented workflow with lots of different tools being used, which makes it easy for students to have scattered work and easy to sort of not stay organized. But also for faculty and TAs and you folks that work with the students, it's oftentimes to teach and track students through that process because all the student data and work is trapped in these different data silos, right? You don't have a great sort of holistic view of where students are or where they might be struggling or falling behind. And so in order to address this over the years, what we've built is really Scribble as a super app for research and writing in the sense that we've consolidated a lot of those tools under one roof. So we help students curate, annotate, cite, and write all in one platform. And I should be very clear, when I say write, I don't mean that they're writing in a word processor of our own. We're actually integrated and partnered with Google and Microsoft so that the pre-writing work that you do in Scribble is easily brought into your Google Doc or your Microsoft Word doc when you're writing that through integrations that we have with both word processors. The quick and easy way for me to share, what Scribble is and how it works. Typically, I show a 2-minute product explainer video, which is what I'm going to do now. And this is where I was asking Jeff if he comes off camera and just gives me a thumbs up once the audio starts playing to make sure you all can hear it okay. That'd be helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now because that typically works pretty well. The only thing I'll just tell you folks that are watching this is that the video was originally made for a very googly audience in K-12. So it has a lot of references to Google. If you are not using Google or if you have a lot of folks on campus that maybe use Microsoft, please don't tune out. As I'll explain a little bit later, everything we do for Google that you see in the video, we also do for Microsoft. It's just that we haven't updated the video yet. But all the integrations and the partnership that we have with Google, same thing exists for Microsoft. So let me go ahead and play the video and hopefully Jeff will give us a thumbs up.
Until now, students have had to use multiple separate tools for their research and writing work, making it time-consuming, frustrating, and hard to stay organized throughout the process. Scribble unites this disjointed workflow by bringing everything together under one roof. It's a super app for students, educators, and librarians to curate, annotate, cite, and write. With Scribble, curating information is easy. Scribble saves web pages, PDFs, and database articles instantly to a cloud-based library with just a click of the Scribble Chrome extension. You can also add files like PDFs from your desktop and Google Drive. You can richly annotate articles directly in the browser and even collaboratively annotate with others in real time. Citations are generated automatically. Scribble pulls citation information from articles and books and instantly displays the properly formatted citation. The Scribble library stores a wide variety of file and information formats. Stay organized by using full text search and tags to find articles. Scribble also empowers the writing process. Quickly generate an outline by dragging and dropping quotes and comments from your Scribble library. In Google Docs, the Scribble add-on allows you to access your library so you can easily insert your outline and bring your evidence, comments, and citations into the paper while automatically updating your bibliography. Scribble is deeply integrated with Google for Education, including roster sync and assignment integration with Google Classroom. Scribble also offers rich analytics for tracking student progress in real time. Quickly see which students are struggling and where they're stuck. Scribble centralizes student work, making it accessible in one place and enabling educators to easily provide timely feedback throughout the entire process. For students, Scribble frees up valuable time wasted on manual and mundane tasks or higher level learning, like reading critically for quality evidence and crafting strong arguments. For educators, Scribble enables personalized instruction for close reading, research, and writing.
Okay, so that's basically it. I'm going to go back to the slides and kind of follow up on a few things. The video touches upon this, but I think it's worth unpacking it a little bit more. It just sort of explains that, we're able to show analytics and data around the work that students are doing as part of an assignment. I think it's worth spending a little bit more because it doesn't go into a lot of depth in that brief video. So this is an example of what we're able to show, a faculty member or a TA you if you're as a librarian, somebody that's made a co-teacher or co-instructor on an assignment, we're able to show you how many students are on target and off target at the course level for all the different steps, let's say in the writing process, right? So we can show you how many students are have started the research or not, started the paper or not, or met certain goals that would have been set by for the students when the assignment was created. And so really kind of at a glance, you can get a lay of the land and you can identify quickly at a high level who are the students that maybe need some extra help or attention. For example, maybe these are the 5 students that really you should meet with or encourage to come to office hours because they haven't even started the research yet and the paper's due within a week or something like that, right? We also have data at the individual student level, obviously, so we can show you, for example, that in this case, Jordan has collected 6 articles as part of her research, met the first goal, on her way to meeting the second goal. Susan's the rock star because she's all in the green and she's already turned it in. Kara here still has a lot of work left to do. All things that you want to know as soon as possible so that you can help them course correct or check in with them or encourage them to come and get extra help or go to the writing center, right? Whatever your mechanisms are to kind of help students stay on track or keep from, having things go off the rails. This data can actually help you identify that almost as an early warning system in a way that historically is not how this work is done by faculty. And what's interesting here is that historically, what we've seen is faculty in higher ed, and certainly the work we've seen in K-12 teachers, will oftentimes rely on being able to meet in person or kind of rely on certain moments to get a check-in to see where students are at. And the reality is those moments are sometimes few and far between, or there may be ones that not everybody will take advantage of. So not everybody comes, for example, to office hours, or not everybody will go to the writing center. And so you don't necessarily know really everybody who needs help, or you don't necessarily know how best to spend that time with them when they show up, because you're spending part of that time just getting caught up on where they're at. The beauty of this sort of approach and this view is that this data is being made available to you as a faculty member, let's say, or as a librarian that's working with them, or maybe somebody in the writing center, as a byproduct of the work the students are always doing, right? And so it's getting updated in real time just as they're doing the work. And you can sort of jump into a student's assignment library, which I'll talk about in a few minutes here, to sort of see where they're at. And that means that when they're in front of you, you can actually spend less time just getting the book report of where they're at and spend more of that time going deeper into any issue they have, right? And talking about what challenges they might be facing. And so that's part of what we're trying to do. Our design philosophy is that we're trying to use the power of modern data and software to empower educators to make better decisions about how they spend their time with their students, especially, but not only, but especially when that time is face-to-face, right? When they're with you for office hours, et cetera. And so this, I think, gives you greater insight to have a more productive conversation with them when they're in front of you. The last thing here I'll point out on this slide is on the right-hand side, these pie charts where it says source types really begin to get into area of media literacy, which we know is really important to certainly folks in the library world. The idea here is that when students are saving their research into Scribble, we're able to automatically categorize it into sort of major categories. So for example, in Jordan's case, we could show you that 2 of the articles that she saved are from government websites. One's a Wikipedia article, which might be a no-no in terms of quoting from a credible source. 2 are from academic websites and so forth. And so at a glance, you can get a rough sense of kind of the credibility and diversity of sources they're using. And I should point out that it's not just open web resources that we categorize. We're also compatible with a lot of the databases that are out there that are being used. So, EBSCO, JSTOR, Britannica and Gale and K-12, et cetera. And that list is always growing. And so we're able to show you whether students are actually using those credible vetted sources of information that you're oftentimes paying for as a library and encouraging them to use as vetted sources of information, or are they just Googling it? And if so, what kinds of open web resources are they using? And I'd say this is early work we've done in the area of media literacy, but we have a lot more planned there, particularly around helping students be able to evaluate, bias and things like that in the sources that they're using. But please just know that that's really important to us, and we've worked with librarians very early, in our history, and we continue to do that. This slide just sort of talks a little bit about the third-party integrations that we have. So I've already talked a little bit about how, although the video is very googly, we are equally integrated and partnered with Microsoft. So kind of everything you saw in that video that applies to the Google world, applies to the Microsoft world as well. And we'll be updating that video in the future to make that more clear. We have integrations with learning management systems. I'm sure some of you are using things like Blackboard or other LMSs, and just know that those are on our list as well. And we'll have, I think, probably some of that done for the fall. And then we have other sort of rostering and single sign-on platforms that we work with. I know Clever is probably much more used in K-12, but I know ClassLink is oftentimes used in K-12 and in higher ed. And so just know that we try really hard, and we're pretty good at doing third-party integrations, but we try really hard to kind of work in a seamless fashion with other platforms that are being used by students and educators on campus. I won't go super deep on this, but I'll just sort of explain also that we know that accessibility is a really important thing. And so we take a universal design for learning lens towards the things that we build. So we have VPATs, for those that are familiar with those documents, that really kind of talk about our compliance with accessibility standards. And I think we've done a pretty good job, but we're always making that better and better. But these are some examples of some assistive features that we've built to basically support students of all kinds of diverse needs, right? So read aloud, for example, is something that that can help students that are better auditory learners. Translations and definitions are particularly good for students that are ELL, or even students that are not don't have English as a second language but might be taking a foreign language class. So just know that these plus other things that are not on this slide are important things that we've built to make Scribble as accessible as possible, and we're always improving that over time. I'm going to probably just gloss over this slide because it's really meant more for a K-12 audience, but there's a part of it that I think might be really interesting and relevant to you all. The basic idea is that when I show this slide to folks in K-12, I talk about how our platform is pretty broadly useful in the sense that it actually is used across grades and subjects in K-12. Now, I think the part that's most relevant for you all would be that many of your students that are coming to you may be involved in some of the activities that you see here in K-12. So you can see on the left-hand side, you probably have students that have maybe potentially used Scribble in some of these areas, and so they may already be familiar with that when they're coming to you. Certainly, dual enrollment in early college has really exploded in popularity over the last couple of years. And so to the extent that we're also working with districts in Wisconsin in K-12, you may actually have an opportunity to see overlap between K-12 and your world because we serve dual enrollment in K-12, and that obviously overlaps with your world. The more important thing, the real reason I wanted to show you this slide is that in K-12, there's a lot of emphasis these days in many places around college readiness. And we actually built Scribble specifically to support that in a way that a lot of other K-12 ed tech tools have not been designed for. And that is that we built it for portability from high school into college. So what happens is, let's say we're working with a district like we are in some Wisconsin districts, and a student graduates from high school, they can associate a personal email address with their account when they graduate, and they can take that data and their account with them to college. And so you can actually have students that are coming from your feeder high schools directly into your college campuses, already having a Scribble account and maybe even having their portfolio of work from before, which could be really interesting. And so we just want to let you know that we've sort of taken that high school to college transition very seriously and engineered the product to support that in a really seamless and easy way for your students that are coming in from your feeder school districts. This is something we don't always talk about, but I think you may find quite interesting if you're thinking about things like collaborative readings and situations in courses where students are being asked to do course readings. So our platform is really well designed to support the writing process, which is kind of what the main topic of this webinar is. But we've had people sometimes say, hey, we don't do a lot of research or writing in certain areas, either subject areas or programs, or in K-12 certain grades. But they love the annotation platform because it supports close reading and text analysis. So from a literacy perspective, if you will. And there's some reasons for that. And I think this might be interesting for you to think about as we can use Scribble for research and writing, but also here's another kind of application, if you will, of what we've built. So one example or one reason for this is that we have this really rich annotation platform that we've built, right? And there's two parts to it that I think are interesting. We have our own cloud-based PDF viewer built into the platform, which is great. There are a lot of PDF viewers out there these days, so that in and of itself isn't necessarily the most sort of groundbreaking thing, but it is sort of integrated with the rest of the platform, which makes it easy to use. The sort of more impressive kind of novel thing about our annotation platform is that we've actually kind of cracked the technical nut on being able to web annotation pretty consistently and well. This is the area that we started in. When we first started the company, we were trying to figure out how to make it easy for people to be able to curate and annotate online articles. And so web annotation was a really important user experience we wanted to nail. And we have a novel algorithm under the hood that lets us do that in a much more robust way than anybody's done it before. And so having one platform that you can use, right, as a faculty member for course readings that you can use to annotate both PDFs that might be in a database or something that you've uploaded from your desktop, as well as, news articles that might be on a website or from a course website. That's pretty powerful because you can basically kind of keep all of your content annotated in one platform, regardless of essentially which of the two major types of content you might be using. And I say certainly for social sciences, a lot of the content you look at these days might be in a news article, on a blog post, basically in some form that is HTML, and our platform handles that really well. The second thing is that we've actually allowed for real-time collaboration for synchronous text analysis. So if you wanted to do something like, have students be able to work synchronously on a collaborative reading, maybe even during course time, you could do that in our platform. And in that way, it feels and looks a little bit like Google Docs or Word Online, where you can have multiple people in an article reading and co-annotating, and everybody seeing each other changes in real time, right? So Johnny highlights something and Billy attaches a comment to it and Susie replies to it. They're seeing each other's changes pop up in real time on that article. And that's a pretty modern, seamless experience, which is great. Third is that we're not a content provider. We're actually agnostic. So we don't sort of say, hey, you should use Scribble for literacy because, we have better content. We're agnostic. We sort of say you can bring in, articles that you might have from even a database or another literacy app provider or something like that. You can upload PDFs from your desktop. As I mentioned, you can grab database articles, news articles, blog posts, etc. And so you have this kind of tremendous flexibility with the kind of content you can use for course readings. And then the fourth thing is that we allow for fast and easy dissemination. And this could be really great to really allow faculty to be able to kind of pull together essentially a course pack, if you want to think of it that way. But we have this idea of a library, which you saw in the video. A library kind of houses all of your articles that you've curated, let's say for a research paper. But that same idea of a library can be used for what we call a class library. And a faculty member or a TA could create a class library, and that could be a place where you curate a bunch of course readings, right? Again, from maybe many different sources. And all the students immediately have access to that class library because they're in that class, which has been assigned to that library. And that can be a quick and easy way for you to basically curate a reading list. So just some things to think about of other ways that you could use the platform. And I think one of the things that I'm proud of is that we've built Scribble in such a way that it's very flexible and you can use it in a bunch of different ways. So it's not kind of rigidly built just for helping you with a research paper or a term paper. At our core, we have built a set of content curation, annotation, and collaboration tools that you can use in a bunch of different ways. It just so happens that it's really well optimized for helping you with a classic research paper, but you can also use it in this way to support course readings and things like that. Or even collaboration between faculty members if they're working on a project together, which we could talk about if you're interested. All right, so I'm going to take a sip of water and take a quick pause and just give folks an opportunity if they want to put any chats or questions into Zoom here, which I'm happy to answer if I see them pop up as they come up. And then if there's nothing after about 10 or 15 seconds, then I'll move on to part two, which I know many of you are probably waiting for, since that was kind of the main topic of the webinar. Okay, I don't see anything popping up, so I'll keep going, but I know Jeff's keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A, so feel free to put those in there and we'll get to them as well. All right, so let's transition into talking about AI. Many of you undoubtedly are probably facing this. Maybe I can prompt you for a question, which is, if you don't mind, maybe in the chat, if you can put in for me, and I'd love to respond to it as I go through this, how many of you are seeing, or to what extent are you seeing, concern from faculty members about AI-generated text from ChatGPT or other platforms appearing in student-submitted assignments, particularly writing assignments like papers, and kind of being passed off as students' authentic work? So would love to just, prompt you all for some comments or feedback on how much you've seen that or how much of a concern that is with the faculty that you work with. So just take a minute and let us know. I'd love to see what you've been experiencing. Probably should have created a poll around this. I think that would have been probably the fast way to do it, but right. So thank you. Got somebody saying here, our faculty was addressing an AI policy at their meeting this week. I'm waiting to hear what they've decided. And that's very common. We've across the country all year, right? I go to events and I have people telling me that they're putting together a task force. They're putting together a committee. They're trying to figure out what their AI policy is. They're trying to figure out, how they're going to conduct AI literacy to help students know when and how to use AI and when not to. Somebody else here, Maxwell, is saying many faculty I know are experiencing students submitting AI-generated written work. Okay, good. Well, let's see this more. Diane saying, I think there is concern generally, but not necessarily because of specific instances. Okay. Folks, continue to add to that. I appreciate you're making this a little interactive with your replies. And I'll probably address some of these things as we go. But let me go ahead and go back to kind of the main event and kind of tell you a little bit about what we've learned and how we think this problem can be addressed. So before I kind of dive into kind of our thinking on it, I wanted to just say that from our perspective, my perspective in particular, AI in the learning world, right, in the learning environment, it's like any disruptive technology in that it can be used for good or bad. It really just depends on what you do with it. So it's not inherently anything, right? Like any technology or tool, it really depends on how you handle it and what you do with it. But we do believe that it has tremendous benefits if used correctly, and it also has some risks. And if you're not careful, those risks, can be a problem. In the way that we think about it and how we think about AI relative to the writing process, we're trying to stay pretty focused on student cognitive development as our North Star to make sure that that is not that is both enhanced when you use AI properly and also not sacrificed if it's misused, or trying to be careful to not misuse it so that student skills are not sacrificed in the process. And so at the same time, everybody kind of recognizes that with the way that ChatGPT and other AI platforms are growing, these things are not going away, most likely, right? These are genies that are not going to go back in the bottle. And so we do need to be careful to make sure that we also don't just stick our head in the sand, but we do try to foster these skills in an effective and ethical way going forward so they can be prepared to use them ethically and effectively in the work that they do when they're with you, as well as when they go on to the work environment. Now, I like to start with a little bit of data of the students that are coming to you, right? Because I think this is going to be a pipeline of students that are doing things with AI in high school and even earlier. And so what their predisposition is going to be pretty important when you see them freshman year or in first year. And so, one of the compounding challenges to the classic challenges we've had to writing and writing skills development is now that, unfortunately, what you see on this slide is happening. Junior Achievement had done this survey last summer, asking over 1,000 13 to 17-year-olds about AI, and more than 4 in 10 of them, so 44% of them, said that they're likely to use AI to do their schoolwork instead of doing it themselves, even though 60% of them consider that essentially some form of cheating. So unfortunately, this is just the world we live in now. And they're telling us about it. And I did have a survey from earlier in the year last year, a couple months after ChatGPT launched, that was for higher ed, and it showed similar responses from college students saying that they're using AI kind of to do their writing for them. And the question is, why does it matter? I think for a lot of us that are concerned about this, including your faculty members that may be talking about it, at the end of the day, if you as a student are not sort of doing the work, if you're outsourcing the work to the machine, you're kind of bypassing that productive struggle and not flexing those mental muscles that we've historically associated with the classic writing process that develops those critical thinking skills and those key cognitive skills that get sort of flexed and developed along the way. So things like evaluation, organization, prioritization, sequencing, synthesis, et cetera. And I think that that is a thing that we know has been a challenge. That is a challenge that we have to authentic learning. And then what we're seeing happening going forward is that states, and we've seen this in K-12, and I think it's going to be happening increasingly in higher ed as well, that higher level sort of bodies are beginning to put out guidance for AI. So in K-12, what we've seen just in January is state superintendents of instruction, as well as departments of education, are putting out guidance that says things like students shall not submit AI-generated work as their own original work, right? And these are the kinds of policies that I'm sure your campuses and your task force committees are also considering. And so it really is because there's a question of academic integrity that is, being questioned right now, and that's of concern. Now, to get a little bit into how we think maybe how not to solve the AI plagiarism, I wanted to share a little bit of what I've learned over the last year, having lots of conversations with faculty, librarians, teachers in K-12, really folks all from across the education universe about this problem. And what I'm going to present quickly here, and then we'll get to how we think we can solve the problem. But first, I wanted to kind of put up what I think are some of the ways people have been responding that are not necessarily the best ways to think about this. And then we'll switch over to what we think is a better way. So I've been calling these what I call potential pitfall perspectives. So, everybody doesn't necessarily say these things exactly verbatim, but I've kind of simplified it, maybe oversimplified it a little bit for the purposes of this slide. So these are the kinds of things that we see people sometimes are saying. And I'm going to kind of quickly go through each one of these and unpack these a little bit. In some cases, I think it's pretty obvious why this is not the right way to think about it. In some cases, I think it's not totally wrong, but the picture might be incomplete the way people have been talking about it. So hopefully I don't need to sell this too much to you, but we don't think that just abandoning the writing instruction is a good way to go. I used to say that nobody says these words verbatim, that we don't need to teach writing anymore, as you see there in the top. But sadly, I was actually in Utah for a conference about a month ago, and we did have somebody tell a story about in K-12 about how a neighboring principal within their district had basically told their teachers that, which is horrifying to me because that means that those students aren't going to get that instruction, which inevitably will end up having a ripple effect to the higher ed institutions that are downstream. I like the way David McCullough talks about it. I think it's really succinct and to the point. Writing is thinking. To write well is to think clearly, and that's why it's so hard. And I think the writing is thinking part of it is really, really important. Other folks have said similar things. Different faculty from other institutions. I think Stephen Mintz sort of unpacks it kind of nicely as well. The writing is not just a mode of communication. Certainly it is a mode of communication, but that's not all it is, particularly in education, right? Particularly when students are with us in the education system. It's important that they go through this process because that is what forces them to reflect, think, analyze, evaluate evidence, formulate hypotheses, et cetera. And so that process is really important, and that we want to make sure that process isn't sacrificed just because we are sort of skipping it to basically get the work done, right? And just get the paper at the end of the process from the chatbot. So hopefully I don't have to sell that too much. We don't think that's the right way to think about this problem. Another one that we hear quite often is, hey, we just need to embrace AI because it's here to stay and it's not going away. And I would say, yes, that's true, right? It is here to stay. We believe that based on what we've seen happen over the last year. But when we say embrace, what are we actually talking about? What does that mean? And what we see is that historically, when we talk about teaching and learning, those two words are kind of thrown together in a phrase, teaching and learning. It's like one thing. The reality is they're not, right? They're very different activities. How you teach and what you learn are sort of two different things. And instructor use versus student use are two different things. And so oftentimes what I've seen happen on campuses is you've got at one end of the spectrum, English faculty, as well as other educators that are talking about this problem, about this AI plagiarism problem, and they're concerned about it. And that's a student misuse issue. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've oftentimes got early adopters. Sometimes that's English faculty, but sometimes it's instructional tech folks, it's tech directors, et cetera, that are really excited about AI. Maybe they're technophiles, and they're talking about all the wonderful things you can do with it. And I've certainly had administrators tell me they use it for graduation speeches and recommendation letters and policy development, all kinds of things. And those things are great, right? And our view is that those are not necessarily bad things. But the problem is that these two different camps are kind of having tension and butting heads a little bit when they don't really need to be, because they're both actually not wrong. There is a student misuse issue, and there are amazing things you can do it from an administrative and teaching perspective. Teachers or faculty using it for course planning, for example. But the problem is that those two camps are oftentimes not having the same conversation because they're actually talking about two different sets of use cases, and they're kind of talking past one another. And so one of the things we always recommend is that when you're doing your policy development, make sure you're very specific about what use cases you're talking about, because then you'll actually get into the weeds where you need to be to make sure you're being very specific about when it's okay to use it or how or not, and how you should use it or not. And I think when you don't do that, you run into the problem that we had early over the last year, where people were kind of for or against it, ban it versus embrace it, and really talking past one another because they weren't talking about the same examples. This slide is kind of an extension of that idea, where many of the folks that are real big proponents of AI have been saying, hey, I use it for work. Maybe many of you are using it for your own work, right? And they're saying, I use it for work. It's great. I don't want to keep it from our students because A, maybe that feels hypocritical to you. If you're using it, why should you keep it from students? And B, maybe because you feel like you need to help them prepare, for being able to use it effectively going forward. And typically when I'm talking to administrators, I sort of say, that's fantastic. You're using it as a productivity tool as an adult in the workplace. And that's great. But remember that you often, hopefully, mostly, develop these skills of being able to write and revise and think really at a time before AI was really out in the world the way it is today. So you have those foundational skills. You develop that foundation of knowing what to do with the first draft of what ChatGPT gives you. And let's be careful not to kind of lose that as we make this transition into the AI world, just because the machine can now do it for us, right? So it's important to draw a line we think, between an adult in the workplace using it for productivity, which is great, versus students that are really at an earlier stage of life and maybe in a different stage of cognitive development when they're in learning mode, as we say on this slide, where we really want them to not bypass the foundational skills development, or even, frankly, just the thinking process that helps them become better thinkers, and kind of have those skills so they can become more productive down the road when they're in that work environment. It's important not to conflate the two. And, I think as a matter of what's going to happen going forward, we believe it's really important that we don't skip the foundational skills and we don't skip that cognitive development for two reasons. One is, while it does seem like AI will be broadly available everywhere, there may be times when you really do want people to be able to think without having the crutch of having an AI bot tell you what to do. A good example is if you're in a conversation, right? If you're put into a situation where you need to have a conversation, you need to think on your feet, maybe you're giving a presentation or you're having a debate with a colleague about something in the work environment, you want the human brain of that person to be able to think on the fly and be able to synthesize and analyze what's coming at them and being able to respond in real time instead of saying, hold on, let me check in my app what ChatGPT is telling me about how I should respond to you. Right? We don't want to live in that world. At least I don't want to live in that world. So knowing that even with AI being sort of potentially around pretty ubiquitously in the future, which is probably likely, you want humans to be able to think on their feet without having to essentially rely on an app or an AI bot for every response to anything challenging coming towards them, right? That's what it means to be a critical thinker. So that's one. The second one is that, I think that we'll actually be better users of the AI tools if we have those foundational skills, right? A lot of the people that tell me that they're using these AI bots for their own work, I say that's great. You're using it for policy development. You took something that came out of ChatGPT and you edited and revised it and sent it on, but it's because you kind of know what good looks like. You had an independent evaluation and an independent experience doing this work without technology doing it for you. So you kind of know what looks right, what looks wrong. Remember that the AI isn't necessarily going to know your audience. It's not going to necessarily know your voice. And so you had the ability to take that first draft and be able to sort of edit it and revise it properly and make it into final form. And I think if you have an independent experience developing those skills, you'll be a much better and more powerful power user of these really powerful tools that are coming at us now as a result, if you have that independently. And so we do think it's not just a question of, not robbing students of that learning experience, but it's also a question of actually making sure that these new powerful tools are used as effectively as they can be because you know what to do with them. I won't spend a lot of time on this because I think this is probably not as big of a deal in higher ed, but in K-12, we certainly see people sometimes saying, well, we're just going to have students write in front of us. We're just going to have them write in class. Some cases are talking about going back to, paper and pen. And I think this is kind of regressive because we just spent billions of dollars, at least in K-12. And I know probably this happened a bit in higher ed as well, through the pandemic on one-to-one devices so that students could spend more time and be more effective users of technology at home. And now if we basically say, well, we're not going to be able to trust students to be able to do this work without taking the shortcut when we have to do it in class or in a proctored environment, you're taking one of the most time-intensive things that you do, research and writing, and trying to squeeze it into a proctored environment, let's say in higher ed, or squeeze it into a class time in K-12. And that's actually going to impact the kind of writing you're doing, right? The kind of writing that we historically were able to trust students to do at home was oftentimes longer, maybe over multiple weeks, and maybe more in depth, multiple pages, use lots of sources, et cetera. If you're not trying to adapt that to an environment where it's got to be proctored or, somebody's got to look over their shoulder while they're in class in K-12, it's going to fundamentally change and limit the kind of depth of knowledge work that you can do. It's going to be shorter and it's probably going to be much more shallow. So I think that's an unintended negative consequence of that approach. Okay. And then I think hopefully many of you have been following this, but about a year ago, there was a lot of hype and hope that, we'd be able to rely on AI detectors to save the day. And I think that's because historically, before ChatGPT launched, there was a lot of reliance upon classic plagiarism detectors for classic plagiarism, right? Turnitin is the classic example, but there are other ones that are out there. And that worked really well, right? Classic plagiarism detectors worked well for classic plagiarism because the problem under the hood was fundamentally different than what we're facing now. The problem under the hood back then, well, it still exists, but historically what the main problem was that a student would find, some content online, or they find a paper that another student had written in an online database or online service, and they copy and paste that into the document and they submit that to you. And then you would have the students submit their papers to Turnitin or one of these other platforms. And they basically do a text matching, right? They'd look at the text in the document, they'd match it to whatever was in their database of many papers that had they'd accumulated over the years. And that platform will be able to show you, you can see that Johnny's second paragraph came from Billy's second paragraph from a paper that Billy wrote 3 years ago. And that worked, right? It was pretty straightforward. Well, the problem now is that the text that's being generated by these AI platforms is generated novel every time. So there's no database that you can compare against to say, hey, was this generated by ChatGPT? And in fact, I think a lot of people don't know this, and I don't remember the details, but I do remember hearing that even OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, had a project, or I think early on, where they were trying to put something out there that could help you determine whether or not the text that you submit to it was written by a machine, i.e. by ChatGPT, for example, and they ended up pulling that project. My view is that if they're not able to tell us, I really don't know if anybody else is going to be able to do a great job. And yet people have tried. So a year ago, Turnitin developed an AI detection algorithm. Other platforms did as well. And we had, over a year with those things now. And unfortunately, those things have, surfaced a lot of sort of false detections of false negatives and false positives. This article that you're seeing on the slide right now is from last summer. That was a Washington Post analysis of a small set of examples, and they really said, false detections are a real risk. And there have been many other examples like that I've heard anecdotally when I've gone to conferences and events, or that you could Google and you could probably find online yourself. And so as a result, what's been happening is, I'll skip this for now, a lot of colleges have been turning off the sort of AI detection part of Turnitin, because they're basically saying, we don't want to be put in a position where our faculty are being told that a student has, quote unquote, AI cheated, but we can't really prove it because we can't really rely on what the detector is telling us. And so that's what we see happening kind of across the board, and it's happening in K-12 as well. Let me go back to this slide for just 1 second, because maybe this is worth giving an example. Some of you may don't know this, some of you may have seen this. This is an example of a student, I believe in higher ed, who said, and I pulled this example off Reddit, you could probably find it as well on your own, but it was pulled off Reddit, and he said that, he basically had written an article about longevity escape velocity. It was flagged as AI generated by GPT-0, which is one of these other platforms that tried to solve this problem through an AI detection algorithm. And then he basically asked GPT to rewrite the article as if it was written by a high school student. So GPT introduced some grammatical and spelling errors, and then it flew right through the GPT-0. So it flew through that AI detection algorithm. So this is a way in which you can kind of game the systems and the detectors become manipulable. I've also heard examples of places where, on the flip side, students may have legitimately used Grammarly to help them with their grammar, and that sets off the AI detection algorithm to say, hey, the student actually, quote unquote, AI cheated, when in fact they were just using a grammar tool. And so it's been pretty messy, and there have been examples like this that have been popping up over the last year, and that's why, folks have been frustrated about what to do, and have sort of said, well, we can't really bank on this way to solve this problem. So that is some of the ways in which we think it's how you don't solve the problem, or at least people have tried and it's not working. Now I'm going to shift to kind of what has been the kind of headline of the webinar, which is, what can we do about it, right? How do you actually try to solve this problem? What we realized early on, because of the work that we do, is that the reason the detectors fail is because they really just treat writing as the end work product, right? They just look at the text in the paper that the student submits at the end of the process and say, okay, let's run an algorithm over that and try to tell if it was written by machine or human. Turns out it's a really hard problem to solve that way, right? Otherwise, I think we would have seen it solved in that way by now. However, because of the work that we have always done, where we're with students through that writing process, we realize that there's actually a different way to address this problem, and it requires a bit of a pedagogical shift and a different approach to sort of assessing the student's writing. If you really focus on writing as a process and not just the end work product, it becomes a much more solvable problem. Now, you've seen the video, and so you can see that we're with students through that process because we're helping them curate their sources, annotate their evidence, cite their sources, build an outline, build a bibliography, and then we integrate with Google Docs and Microsoft Word so that that is brought into their paper as well. What I didn't explain before, and it's not in the video, and this is really important, is that we actually make all that visible, right, to educators during the process when the assignment is being worked on for formative feedback and assessment along the way. We also make it visible to them at the end, because in our system, when students submit the assignment, they're not just submitting the end work product or the paper, they're submitting what we call an assignment library of work that they did along the way. So the way that works is that in our system, when you have an assignment, we create what's called an assignment library for every student for that assignment. And that assignment library houses all the different components of the student's work. There's a tab for their curated research. There's a tab for their annotated evidence. There's a tab for their bibliography or works cited page. There's a tab for their outline. We even have a tab for their paper where we embed the Google Docs viewer or a link to the Word Online viewer. We originally built this to help students basically because it centralizes all the work and helps them stay organized. The byproduct for faculty actually is that it also centralizes the work for formative feedback and assessment along the way. And we work with the National Writing Project. One of the things we've learned is that in order to develop good writers, you need to provide them with specific and timely feedback. So the classic model of like, hey, submit a paper and I'll get you back my comments on it, when I can, and maybe it comes a week or two later, oftentimes is sort of so disjointed and far removed from the student's own brain working on that when they're doing the assignment that it doesn't necessarily really have the positive impact that you'd want. Maybe they'll implement that feedback on the next assignment or maybe in another course, but it's sort of a little too late. The way that we've built what we've built is that when you have an assignment in our system, as a faculty member, you can jump into any student's assignment library and see all those different tabs. And we have a feedback mechanism that allows you to leave feedback for each one of those tabs. And so you can say, look at Johnny's assignment library and say, hey, Johnny, you barely started the research and half the sources you're using are Wikipedia. You need to go and replace those with more credible sources. Or you can jump into Susie's library and see that Susie's got a great outline, but there's no, evidence in there to back up her claims. And you can leave that comment and she'll see that and she can reply. And so we have a mechanism by which you can actually have a discourse with the students. It's a little bit like having comments in Google Docs or Microsoft Word, but the beautiful thing is that this gives you a centralized way to be able to have a conversation around what happens before you even get into the document itself. So anyway, the point of all this is to say, we make the process visible and we make it visible for formative feedback and assessment along the way. That's what we've always done. And it just so turns out that all of a sudden becomes more important now in the AI era because emphasizing the process and being able to see that process can give you confidence to know that when you're looking at that paper, okay, yes, I think Johnny really wrote this paper because I can see all the work that went into it, right? And so process over product has really been emerging as the best practice for assessment in the AI era. And we came to this very early in this whole AI revolution because we thought about it as, hey, if you can see the work happening, and if you see that work at the end, when the student submits the paper, they're submitting that assignment library, and you can see all the work they did, you can have confidence knowing that the end work product was based on their work, and it wasn't just a copy and paste job out of ChatGPT. The beautiful thing is, we realize that from our perspective, but over the last year, we've seen that validated over and over by other people really in education. So for example, this is Alana Winnick. She's a tech director from a school district in K-12 in New York, and she wrote a book about generative AI in education. And I was actually presenting at a conference right after her, and she had this process over product on her slide, and I thought I'd take a picture of it. Richard Collada, who's the CEO of ISTE, which is a big K-12 ed tech organization, early in this AI revolution was reference in an article saying, if universities are in this problem or they see students potentially doing what may be happening in some of your courses, they should steer clear of immediately elevating cases to disciplinary action. And instead, they should have students show their work, right? Which is essentially a process-oriented thing that students would have to do. And then Sal Khan was basically preaching something very similar at a conference that he was at right before Thanksgiving. And then basically, now that I've explained it, I probably don't have to say much more about it, but the gist of it is that we're able to do for writing what we've always asked students to do in math, which is show your work along the way. And if you can do that, you actually sort of shift that assessment from that end work product to the paper. And if that is a pedagogical shift that makes sense to you and to your faculty, then we evangelize that whether you work with us or not. But if that is a shift that makes sense to you, the nice thing is that what we had already built for writing support actually provides the tools to be able to do that immediately, right? You can implement that in the course today, as you could have implemented it a year ago, even before ChatGPT came out. And it actually just has the additional side benefit, which we never intended for, but has the side benefit of being able to help you solve this AI plagiarism problem because it does really give you visibility into the workflow and being able to see that process. And I think it also makes it easier for students to do the right thing, right? As some of you have said, your campuses are developing these AI policies, and we hear that everywhere we go right now and have for the last year. But we think there's a difference between telling folks, hey, don't take the shortcut, and don't take the shortcut. And by the way, here's a set of tools that makes it much easier to do the right thing and less painful to do the right thing. And I think that's what Scribble has to offer. And at the end of the day, compared to the detectors, this approach of focusing on the process instead of relying on a detector to kind of detect and play policeman at the end is more instructive versus punitive. It's more prevention versus gotcha, and it's more help versus compliance. And we hope that our contribution to this whole transition now to the AI world is that if we can help mitigate the downside risk of AI plagiarism, maybe we can help shift the conversation to helping people feel more comfortable embracing it in positive ways, because there are lots of benefits to being able to use it if you use it the right way. When we ourselves decided that this process over product thing was going to be a really big deal, we realized that we may be actually sitting on data that students are generating when they're working in our system that we could present to you in a different way that makes the process even more visible. And so last semester, we launched this work progress detail view that shows you on a daily basis for each student where they are in the process and what they're doing. And so, for example, we can show you across 4 buckets, and we'll be adding more categories in the future, what they're doing: research, analysis, synthesis, and writing. And you can imagine in a non-AI world, you might be able to use this data to help students use their time better if they're mismanaging their time. And that might be something that you can pick up out of this kind of a graph. But in an AI world, if you see really there's nothing going on until the very end, right? There's no research, analysis, or synthesis going on. And all of a sudden, at the end, right before the assignment's due, there's a lot of writing. That might be a red flag that you need to have a conversation with the student, because it might be a copy and paste job out of ChatGPT. We're near the end here, so I'm going to just try to wrap up these next 2 slides and have a couple minutes hopefully left for Q&A. I want to be very clear, we're not anti-AI, and I have to be very careful about that, because when I talk about how we can help with the AI plagiarism problem, sometimes people assume that we're trying to prevent the use of AI. That's not the case at all. We do see AI being part of the writing future for everybody. We just want to make sure that it's done responsibly. And so we are actually going to be leveraging and integrating AI, both generative AI and machine learning, into Scribble going forward, which we're working on right now and we'll be probably releasing later this year. And that'll support both the classic writing process, but we also see a place where AI will be integrated as part of a new AI augmented writing process. And in that new future that we're all, moving into very quickly, we know that there are going to be certain skills that are going to be even more important going forward than they have been in the past for the classic writing process. So these will be things like prompt engineering, editing and revising, and fact checking, so that we can check when the systems might be hallucinating and making things up, which we know happens. And so these are going to be things that we're going to be emphasizing when we kind of really add sort of AI writing process support into Scribble going forward. And so we're all about kind of doing both. Right now, there's 1,000 companies and solution providers talking about all the whiz-bang cool things you can do with AI. You'll see some of that from us later this year as well. But there's very few people talking about what you can do in a very actionable, tangible, product-specific way that you can put into practice in the classroom or the course immediately. And we're one of them. And we feel like we can actually help with that in a way that faculty can run with tomorrow. So we think it's important to do both, because we're not anti-AI, but we want to make sure it's being done in a responsible way. I'll just say one thing that's not in the slide that I thought was going to be in this part of the presentation. Oftentimes people tell us that, oh, here it is. They bring up the calculator, and so especially early adopters will say, well, we all freaked out about math instruction being destroyed by calculators years ago, but it all worked out. It'll be fine. English faculty, calm down. It's not a big deal. And I thought, well, they're not wrong in some ways, but what are the lessons that we can learn from what's happened to math instruction in the past? And I think the reality is, the lesson you learn is that there's nothing wrong with automation in the learning process. It just is a question of the right amount of automation at the right time in the journey, right? And so increasing levels of automation are okay as long as skills are mastered along the way. And my litmus test for this is mentally, if you're using AI, is it helping to develop or bypass a skill? If it's helping to develop a skill, fantastic. If it's helping to bypass a skill, that might also be okay as long as that skill's already been developed. And so we see that is how things have evolved in math, right? When you're very young in your math learning, like maybe you're in elementary school, we teach kids how to do long division by hand, but and that's fine. Then they get a little older and we free up that mental space and that time so they can learn more sophisticated things and use calculators to do that. And then you get a little older and you use, formulas and spreadsheets. And then when you get to graduate school, maybe you're using software like R and SAS to do statistical programming. And so you sort of see this evolution where it's okay to use increasing levels of automation because you're learning and mastering skills, and you can free up that time to do more sophisticated things as we go down the path. And I think in writing, we've already started on this path and maybe not really realized it, where just because we've had spell check and grammar check for decades didn't mean that we stopped teaching kids how to do that when they're in elementary school. And I think what we're going to see happening going forward is that we're going to have to be much more intentional about when it's okay and not okay to use AI. But it's really important that in the process, we don't skip those foundational skills that I was talking about earlier, so that students kind of know what should be happening under the hood or in the black box that is AI. And we do think it's also important that we teach that skepticism or that critical eye to the output of AI so that they can sort of, see whether or not what the output is passing the sniff test, right? I used to say that the calculator analogy breaks down at some point because calculators don't hallucinate. But somebody pointed out to me, Victor, that's actually, your calculator analogy is really good because actually, if you don't have the foundational skills for math, you can have a fantastic calculator. But if you don't know the order of operations, you might put in the button, might press the buttons in the wrong order and get the wrong answer out. And so the foundational skills are always going to be important, we think. And if you know those well, you'll be able to both use a calculator as best and you can and properly. And in the same way, I think there's an analogy here for us to apply to writing, where if you know what good writing looks like and you have those foundational skills, you can actually use the AI tools more effectively and also know when they're hallucinating and be able to sort of do the research behind it to be able to, call it out when it's not right or fact check it when it might be wrong. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I'm gonna kind of just go back to the supplemental slide and, or maybe I'll leave this up and just stop there and see if any of you have any questions. Feel free to put it into the chat or the Q&A, or if Jeff has anything that he wants to add, I'd love to hear that. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I'll echo Victor. We'd love to hear any questions that you might have for Victor. Feel free to put something in chat or raise your hand, or we can unmute if you feel like you want to speak. The only thing I would add is that naturally, Scribble is a WiLS vendor partner, and so we do work together to have put Scribble into quite a few K-12 libraries since we started working together, or districts since we started working together. And so it's starting to gain some traction in that space, which is exactly why we thought it was really the right time to be to showing it off to our higher ed libraries as well. You've probably seen Victor in Taco Tuesday. If you watch our Taco Tuesday sessions, he's done a couple of those. But we want, naturally those are short. So we wanted to make sure Victor had time to really dig into a topic like this without the constraint of that short time.
Yeah, and obviously we'd love to work with you because we think we have something that really meets the moment and can help you and your faculty during this kind of what I've discovered is a kind of a time of anxiety for a lot of faculty. So we think we have something that can really help. And we sort of preach what we preach, regardless of whether or not you work with us, because we do feel like this process over product thing is a real important pedagogical shift everybody's got to make. But like I said, if it is something that resonates with you and your faculty, then I think that we have something that can really help you implement that in a turnkey way pretty quickly. So let us know. And I'm sure when Jeff sends this out, I think that hopefully he'll copy me on the email, and you can feel free to reach out to him. And if you'd like to set up a call or talk to us about how we can work with you all, we'd love to do that.
I will definitely do that for sure. If you're watching this in the recorded version, you should have gotten contact information for Victor along with it. I'll include his email in the email that announces the recording. But if you're just stumbled on this on our YouTube channel or something like that, please do reach out to us here at WiLS. We'd be delighted to put you in touch with Victor if you've got questions about Scribble or what it can do for you. And like with anything else here at WiLS, if you are looking for a quote or want to start talking about what it might actually look like financially for you here through WiLS, let us know in all the same ways that you normally do, and we'll help you with that too.
And Jeff, they can forward that email or share this recording with within their college campuses, right, to their faculty.
Absolutely, please do. I mean, we know that this is a product that doesn't only, or maybe not even primarily, live in the library. So please, that's our entree into your institutions. As you know, we work with you in the libraries, but I think some of the folks that came live, I don't recognize all the names. I have a feeling some of those folks might be outside of the normal bubble of specific librarians that I work with at higher education, and hopefully maybe it's even going beyond the libraries at this stage. But we encourage you to spread this out to your faculty as well, because we think it's a tool that would be of interest, not only in the library, but certainly beyond.
Yeah, this is the hot topic of the day. I think certainly not amongst just librarians, but faculty and educators of all kinds, actually. And we, of course, work with curriculum instruction, teaching and learning, different departments, English, et cetera. So yeah, if you find it valuable, if you think other folks that are thinking about this or have anxiety about it, feel free to share this with them. And, we'd love to work with them or talk with them if you feel like that's appropriate.
Great. Well, I haven't seen any questions come in, so and we're at 3 o'clock now, so I think it's time for us to come to a conclusion here. Thank you again for your time today, Victor, and thank you to everybody who came to watch us live. And if you're watching the recording, thank you as well. Let us know if we can do anything else for you. Victor, any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think we're good. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye.